Hello and welcome to the National Press Foundation. We're coming to you from the Evelyn Y. Davis Zoom studio. This is part of our ongoing series on poverty and inequality. At the end of our session in Q&A today, we're going to have some information about a new set of prizes for writing about poverty and inequality. Journalists, be sure to stick around for that. But first, we are thrilled to have with us today Nobel laureate Abhijit Banerjee, one of the world's foremost experts on global poverty. He has spent a career researching the causes of poverty and the ways out of it. In addition to being a professor of economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, he is also a founder of the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, which seeks to put theory into action. Banerjee's work in 2019 won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences. He shared it with his wife, Esther Duflo, also of MIT, and Michael Kremer of Harvard.
So thank you very much for having me. It's a great opportunity to tell you about the work we do in the Jameel Poverty Action Lab at MIT, and also a little bit about why we do it. So what JPAL, as the short for Jameel Poverty Action Lab, was started in 2003. And the idea was that we need more policies that are based on scientific evidence. That might seem obvious, but I'll try to make the case that it's not, and that it doesn't always happen. And there were three pillars of that program we set out for ourselves. One is to do careful, randomized evaluations of programs to know actually if they have the impacts people expect of them, to build capacity, maybe in a sense, this includes reaching out to people who are interested in this subject, but also among practitioners of different kinds, governments, NGOs, donors, to interpret evidence and to use evidence and to generate evidence, and finally to speak out on what the evidence is, to bring it to governments, NGOs, everybody else who needs and wants the evidence, the media being a prominent other venue for that. So the idea was to do all these three things in combination, building up one and the other. Just to make the case that evidence isn't always exactly used, here's an example. It's a bit cruel maybe, but it's a World Bank source book on what works. So it's not meant to be like a random kind of passing thought. It was a whole book of list of things that worked. Among them, there was a program in India that put computers in villages. It turned out, this is from the report, it says, it was hard hit by lack of power. The computer kiosks lost money and many had shut. And then apparently they hadn't read their own evidence. They go on to say, following the success of the program. That's a bit the spirit of a lot of exercises. You sometimes even generate evidence, but you don't actually pay attention to it. I would say that sort of two, I think, deep reasons why the use of evidence is kind of often it becomes a constraint why people don't use the evidence even when it's there. Partly because we sort of trust our intuitions, and yet I'm going to make the case that our intuitions are often faulty. For example, there is this kind of very strong intuition you hear in the development world where I live, which is that you should never pay people to do what they should do on their own. That's one general view that often when you say that, well, actually, why don't we try this or that, or why don't we this other solution to this problem, you get this response. And that's one reason why intuition often trumps evidence. The second is that general principles are often where we get stuck. They're often, when they're correct, even when they're correct, they're too general. For example, it's surely true that improving education is difficult without more resources. But what does that tell us? What resources? Teachers, books, charts, papers, curricula, and at that point, basically, neither our intuition nor any kind of abstract theory is going to give us the answer. The devil, alas, is in the details. So we just have to somehow get to the answer. And with that idea in mind, we decided that what JPAL would do was help conduct randomized control trials, kind of like medical trials, where you randomly choose treatment and control groups, and then, or intervention and comparison groups, and then you look at what happens to them, after 6 months, 2 years, 10 years. I'll tell you a little bit about many of those things, and you see if you see a difference, and if there's a difference, and you started with two groups that were statistically identical to start with, you are pretty confident that this was the effect of the intervention. So that's the idea of a randomized control trial. It's kind of like a medical trial, except that medical trials are highly controlled. They often have 100 or 1,000 people. We often have millions of people, and they're much less controlled as a result. They're sort of, I'll give you an example in a bit, but they are often take the form of, one area, people get the choice of a particular program. They may or may not do it. 20% might do it, 80% may not do it. The other area, they don't get the choice. So it's very different in that sense. It's not like you come in every day and get a pill. It's, you may decide to use one. So it's like a medical trial, and in a way it's not. We've been doing this for a while, and we've done a lot of them. They are in 87 countries. There's over 1,000 randomized controlled trials. And something that would not be obvious from the talk I'll give, which will choose a particular kind of a line through a few of these trials, is that they cover a whole range of topics. So they, financial access, livelihoods, but also education, health, governance, environment, just about anything that you might think has some implications for poverty has been studied. Social support programs, I'll talk quite a bit about those. So there's, in a sense, there is a very wide range of topics that are covered in these evaluations. They're on our website if you're interested. Now, given that there are 1,000 trials to describe, I'm not going to do it, obviously. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a few and tell you a little bit about why they tell a story. And that's just to give you a sense of the kind of work we do, where it can lead you. If you wanted to pursue them, what would you look for? So just to give you a flavor of what we have done, I'm going to call this talk Myths, Insights, and Challenges. So this is one that I think many of you may be familiar with. Maybe not that it's a myth, that access to small loans will eliminate poverty. This was very much a mantra in the development world, early 2000s. It was very, very much anybody who was, around then who would have encountered it and was in the development world, or even in the anti-poverty world in the US, would have heard this idea that we just need to give people small loans and will eliminate poverty. Now it's a idea that's very tempting, and it's obviously one that therefore, with good reason, attracted a lot of attention, because it's an idea that you don't even have to give people anything. You just can give them a loan, often at very high interest rates, 30%, 60%, 100%, depending on the country. And even that will help people get out of poverty. So that sounded very tempting, especially tempting to people who thought, well, then we can both make money and do good. The problem was that there was almost no real evidence on that. The problem was that the evidence was based on stories which took the form, typically, Ms. X is from this slum in country Y. She used to be poor. Now she got microcredit, and now we see her and she's no longer poor. The problem with that story is typically Miss X is probably quite a remarkable woman, and she might have actually made her way out of poverty even without the help of microcredit. So to look at that, we needed to do a randomized control trial, and eventually, after much persuasion, actually, we did many. There are of the order of 10 or 12 that have been done all over the world. The one that I'm going to show you was the first of those. It was in India. This was a program which basically gave people $200 as a loan, and then you had to repay that at an interest rate of about 2% per month, which is not trivial. And this was what happened. So one thing that did change, improve, and is as a result of that is their investment. On the right, you see their investment in business durables, which is like the stuff that you're supposed to. The story was that, once they get the loan, they're going to start investing in businesses. Their business will grow. They'll become wealthy, or at least less poor, and that'll start some virtuous cycle which will lift them out of poverty. Now you can maybe, if you compare the bars on the right with the bars on the left, the bars on the left are much bigger numbers. That's how much money they spent. This is per capita expenditure per month. It's sort of, but the main point is that they're both on the same scale. So one of them was like 12, the other is like 120, and the one that's 120 is actually what they spend the money on, which is not the business part of their durables, but the non-business part. They bought TVs, they bought refrigerators, but they bought bicycles, they bought motorcycles. They bought all kinds. They repaired their house. They did all kinds of good things, but they did not invest it in business. And therefore, it's no surprise that if you compare these two groups, these are the ones in yellow are the people who got the loans, and the people who in blue are the ones who didn't get the loans, the blue-green. And there's really no difference between them. They didn't get, this is their measure of their per capita expenditure, how much money do they spend per month, and they really don't spend any different amount. And that's the message that we got from repeatedly from different studies across the world, across very different places, in Mongolia, in Moldavia, in Bosnia, in Peru. You keep going, we keep finding the same thing, which is that, people spend the money on perfectly good things, but they don't actually get richer as a result of that. And that's sort of been important in, I think, shifting the perspective. Microcredit is no longer the kind of the mantra for improving everything. As soon as people get it, people don't get less poor. I think that's now one of the myths that we no longer fight. That this was a result of about 5-6 years of research. Now that's not to say that this is microcredit is a bad thing. I want to say I'm happy that they're buying refrigerators, televisions, they're getting their daughters or sons married, etc. They're setting up some new businesses to pay for this loan. But once they paid the loan, they kind of shut their businesses and get out. They're not really committed to expanding their businesses based on the loan. Myth number 2, this one is very relevant right now, I would say. as well as the kind of expanded welfare as a result of COVID-19 is kind of ending in many countries. And that's the idea that free money makes people lazy. These are from different randomized controlled trials in different countries. You see the list of the countries below: Honduras, Mexico, Philippines, Morocco, Indonesia, Nicaragua, etc. And there's treatment and control. And these are all randomized control trials where people got some welfare payment that was not conditioned on their working. So it was not a workfare payment, it was something that didn't require them to work. So there was kind of free money, and what this shows is that, there's absolutely no evidence that people became lazier. The probability they worked last week didn't change. The number of hours they worked last week didn't change. Sometimes it went up a little, sometimes it went down a little, but the real message is nothing changed.
One quick question on this chart here, just a clarifying question. Underneath each of the country names, what are the PRAF and PPPP and PAL?
Okay, great question. These are the programs that give them the money. Progresa, being the most famous of them, and in Mexico, is a program that gives families money for if their children go to school. So if their children went to school, they got money. That money didn't make them work any less. PKH is a program which basically gives people a cash transfer, essentially unconditionally.
Okay, thank you.
That's in Indonesia. The Taysir is another one, which is an unconditional cash transfer in Morocco, etc. Nonetheless, this is very recent. There was a, you know this. There was in the recent debates about whether or not the expanded welfare should be contracted as quickly as possible. There was Wall Street Journal said, if you pay people not to work, fewer will work. Chuck Grassley, see what he said, and a bunch of economists said the Wall Street Journal was actually taking issue with a very nice piece of research done by a bunch of quite well-known labor economists at Yale, and what they showed was that these are people who got different levels of the different lines represent people who were at different levels of, they were getting, relative to their previous earnings, they were getting different amounts of extra money from welfare. And there are some people, the red people are getting a bigger ratio than the pale blue people, but all of them, if you look at the date when they get the payment, they're working less. All of them are working less during the pandemic. That's not surprising, but they're working less. All of the drop happens before they get the money, before the money is announced, before the Congress authorizes this payment, the labor supply drops, then it doesn't change. People get the money, nothing changes, it's completely flat. Some places it goes down and up, some places completely flat. So in other words, there is no evidence that people, when they get the welfare payments, the extra welfare payments stop working, but that doesn't stop, unfortunately, it doesn't stop the Wall Street Journal, but just saying that, well, if my intuition is this and your research shows that, well, my intuition has to be right. So I think this was, as you know, we're right now, we're not expanding welfare, but and I think that's probably a bad idea, but it's one that the evidentiary battle needs to go on. So following on that, another idea that sort of once you accept the idea that poor people are not necessarily intrinsically lazy, another idea suggests itself, and this is the one which says, well, maybe not alone, but if you actually give them a one-time boost, give them a one push, give them an asset to work with, maybe that can have durable effects. Maybe that can actually make people richer over, not just, of course, when you get the asset, you can sell it and become richer for a few days, but maybe for a long time. I'll show you that that's actually true. So this is a program called the Graduation Program. It's designed by a wonderful Bangladeshi NGO called BRAC, which is maybe the biggest NGO in the world, actually. It's implemented by various NGOs it was invented by BRAC in Bangladesh, and the Bangladesh version of our study is going to be implemented by BRAC, but in different countries, in India, Pakistan, Ethiopia, Ghana, they were implemented by different NGOs. The program involved, you get an asset, let's say of the order of $200 in an asset. That's often goats, cows, something to start a business with, maybe some trinkets to sell. You get some training, which is somebody comes and spends some time showing you, what do you do with a cow. I mean, how do you take care of a cow? How do you get it, impregnated, etc. And some additional encouragement to save. So it's 3 pieces of the program, and we look at this in this particular publication. We look at this after 3 years after they got the asset, and they are still richer. I'll show you a bit more of the data in a minute. So these are in different places. This is per capita consumption. There is food security. One striking thing is time use. These guys are working harder, not less. The yellow are the people who get the asset. They're working harder and not less hard. It's not true. You can't do it by just giving people the asset. This is a study where we compared just giving people the asset with giving them the asset and the encouragement and the hand-holding. You see that it's really the differences are only in livestock value. When you get goats, you have more goats, but you don't get any richer. Total consumption per month is identical, essentially. This is what I think is really encouraging. This is something we did in India. We followed these people for 10 years after they were given the asset. So this is, and in every single one of them, the per capita consumption is higher. Every single one of these periods, and the gap is not getting smaller. So the control group is also getting richer, as India for a while was getting richer. Everybody was getting a little richer. But the striking fact is that 10 years after, if you were randomly chosen to get this asset, this was a randomized controlled trial. Just to remind you, you are about 25% richer even now, and that's before the pandemic. So that's something that is very encouraging, because it actually suggests that the portrayal of these people as being sort of feckless, irresponsible people who can't take care of themselves is just grossly unfair. These are people who were extremely poor. They were chosen to be, in fact, the poorest of the poor. The way they were found, where you went to the villages and you asked the poor people in the village, who are the poorest among you? And they named these people. So these were the poorest people in the village. And even those people once you give them the push, are able to stay up. And that's both gratifying and important.
If I could ask one simple question on that chart, also a clarifying question. Were those 4 different experiments or 4 different time periods?
So four different time periods. I should be clearer. The first time period is 18 months after they got the asset. The second is 3 years after they got the asset. The third is 7 years after they got the asset. And the last is 10 years after they got the asset.
Okay, thank you.
A second, and again, not unrelated insight is, this is work that from the US, that the problem of the design of welfare systems, as you can see, that's sort of the theme I'm going on. No, not microcredit, but maybe if you give people gifts that might, asset gifts that might actually have durable effects. If you look at the rate of return, by the way, on those asset gifts, they can be as high as 400%, because they are making, 10 years of earnings is a lot of money. They are making more money for 10 years. So that's a lot of money. It pays back your assets easily. This is another side of it. It's sort of this idea of starting with you should design welfare programs to prevent people from abusing them. And I think this idea that welfare programs are sort of the big problem with them is abuse is kind of another myth. And I think the insight is more that the problem is in fact often less welfare queens and people who are just there to exploit the welfare system, and people not claiming what they're entitled to. Here's a study. It's 30,000 over 60 Medicaid participants in Pennsylvania. They're not in SNAP, but given that they're in Medicaid, they're probably eligible for SNAP. SNAP is the Supplementary Nutrition Program, which is what replaced food stamps. This is a randomized controlled trial where one group was given information that they may be eligible, another group was given information and assistance in enrolling. So they were all, or most of them were eligible. One group was told that, look, you are actually eligible. Another group was told that you're eligible and we can help you fill in the forms to apply. After a year, 6% of the control group, those who were not given any help, enrolled. Out of the 30,000, that's 500 people actually enrolled in a program. They were all entitled to it, but they didn't get it. You give them the information, that number goes to 11%. You give them help as well, it goes to 18%. So the 2 point takeaways. One is that this was a good idea to help these people. I didn't do the study. My colleague Amy Finkelstein and Matt Notovigdo from Northwestern University did the study. And the second is that 82% of the people, after all these efforts, didn't take the program, even though they were entitled to it. That's a sort of a fact that you should take away from this, which is that, the idea that there's, welfare abuse is rife is certainly exaggerated, if not plain false. So if you take all of this together, what this is saying is in some sense is the welfare system is often, it's not designed to be particularly encouraging to people to use. A lot of people feel stigma in using the welfare system, given the way it's designed, given the ideology that's associated with it. And therefore, right now, there is you all know that there's a conversation going on about replacing it with something like universal basic income. There are pilots going on, including in the US. There's one interesting one going on in Stockton, California. I would say that while I think making welfare more generous and less demeaning is critical, it's not clear to me that the answer is necessarily universal basic income. There are studies, I'm involved in some studies, one very large study, an 11-year study where, all adults in a village, in a set of, 75 villages randomly chosen out of 300 get 65 cents a day, every day. Not obviously, you don't pay them every day, but that's the average payment for 11 years. So we'll see if that really transforms their lives. We're interested in this subject. I do feel that in a country like US, it's important that we don't assume that just giving people money will necessarily solve the massive misery we see among lots of the poor now. It's not clear to me that it seems like the loss of jobs and the loss of communities has been as big as important a shock to them as the loss in income. And that, so I this is a subject of great interest to me, but I think it's one that where I think more studies are needed to understand how much of the of the of the of the stress is coming from the loss of income and how much is coming from loss of the job and the meaning that it carries, and the communities around those jobs. So those are all issues that we need to think about, and we are indeed thinking about in Poverty Action Lab. And to end, I want to come to a subject also we work a lot on, which is, what's the underlying politics? There's a lot of work in JPL is on the underlying politics, and in particular on the question of how to get political buy-in for real welfare reform, welfare that will be humane, that will be generous, that will be sustaining. And I think, and unfortunately, part of the problem is even the poor are overly cynical. Well, a study I'm going to tell you quickly about is that is about what people's attitudes to welfare are. And one of the things is that a lot of voters, this is from a study of 10,000 potential voters in the US. We did a survey where we asked them, for example, if there was universal basic income, would you stop working? And the answer is almost never yes. So 12% say yes. But would everybody else stop working? Yes, of course. And is there a race element in that? Probably. People in general have the view that, so clearly this is everybody's view. So there's clearly, if they're telling the truth about themselves, they're wrong about the others, since everybody on average, everybody says, I'm not going to stop working, but others will. So they can't possibly be right about both. But I assume that they're just wrong about others. They think that others are all lazier than they are. So I think but that means that there is a sense in which when you go to vote, you're thinking about other people. You're thinking, all those lazy bums, they're going to stop working as soon as I have UBI. So part of it is we're fighting a deep combination of prejudice and lack of information. And there is actually a lot of randomized control trials, very, I think, interesting ones on what does and does not affect voter preferences. And the evidence is actually relatively mixed. The information can help, but sometimes the information is actually interpreted through ideological lenses. They say that if you are telling me this, you're probably a liberal, and therefore it is probably false. So there's a lot of pushback against the information. We've done a bunch of experiments where we give people information, for example, on COVID-19, and in these experiments, you can sort of predict who are the people who will not actually pay attention to the information. So I think this is a critical issue, one which obviously I want to end it on it because the media is central to this question. I hope all of you think of ways in which we can better reach voters, but I think without breaking down this sort of barrier of prejudice, it's going to be hard to carry out real welfare reform because the political support is so limited. And to end, let me say that I think that one thing we've learned is that, and maybe I was trying to illustrate that process, you go from one thing to the other, you solve one problem, you try one thing, it doesn't work, you try something else, it works, then you try you try to expand it in a different direction, you check if this particular thing has an effect, if I offer somebody a free asset, would they take it? Maybe not. Maybe there'll be too much stigma with it. So poverty is really not one problem, it's many problems. And there are many, I think, false answers. The truth is often, unfortunately, uncomfortable. Sometimes we hope that will be one single silver bullet or some solution that we hope for, but sometimes it doesn't work. On the other hand, we have made enormous progress. The body of knowledge that we have now is nothing compared to what we knew 20 years ago. We have a couple of books where we try to summarize that. One is called Poor Economics, which was written 10 years ago, and one that came out at the end of last year called Good Economics for Hard Times. And we try to give you a sense of what is it that we've learned from this work. And I think what we have learned gives us hope that we can win. But absolutely, many of you in the media and much more in the world out there need to join us in that quest. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I will give an endorsement for the book Poor Economics. This is the one I have a paper copy of. I have an electronic version of the other book, which I'm not gonna, don't have my Nook here with me, but it's an outstanding book and very accessible and very readable, and does an outstanding job of kind of describing and pulling in very interesting and relevant examples, the kind of examples that journalists would like to talk, would need for their stories.